"We got married yesterday, just for special people." Those were the exact words my daughter-in-law said to me when I gently asked about the date of my son's wedding. Can you imagine? Your own child, your only son, standing silent beside the woman he chose while she told me I wasn't special enough to witness his vows. I remember standing there, frozen. My lips wanted to move, but no words came out. My chest ached, but no tears would fall. Not yet. I thought of the years I spent raising him, the scraped knees I kissed, the late nights I stayed awake worrying, the sacrifices I made so he could have a future. And in one cruel moment, it was as if none of that mattered. I didn't argue. I didn't fight. I simply nodded, even as my heart shattered. I told myself, stay quiet. Hold your dignity. But deep inside, I wondered, how could a mother become invisible on the most important day of her son's life? I had no idea that within a week, the same woman who shut me out would be dialing my number, her voice trembling, begging me for help. And when that call came, my silence spoke louder than any revenge I could have planned. I always imagined that when the day came for my son to get married, I would be there, sitting proudly in the front row, my hands folded tightly in my lap as I watched him step into the next chapter of his life. I thought about it for years, maybe longer than I should admit. Every time I tucked him into bed as a boy, every time I packed his lunch or helped with his homework, I pictured the man he would become and the family he might one day build. I believed, with all my heart, that I would stand beside him in that moment. A wedding isn't just about flowers, rings, or vows. It's about family. It's about honoring where you came from while stepping into something new. I thought my son knew that. I thought he would want his mother there. After all, hadn't I carried him when he was small? Hadn't I stayed up late nursing him when he had fevers, or held his hand on the first day of school when he was too shy to let go? Those memories are stitched into me. They are part of my skin, part of my soul. For months, I waited quietly for the announcement. I knew he had been serious with her, his girlfriend. I knew that an engagement was coming. I could see it in the way he looked at her, the way he bent his life around hers. I didn't resent it, not at first. That's what love does to young men. It transforms them. I told myself, this is good. This is what every mother wants. A son who has found happiness. Still, there was a little ache in my chest, the ache every mother feels when she realizes she will no longer be the center of her child's world. But I accepted it, because that's what mothers do. We step back so they can step forward. When I heard whispers from relatives that the proposal had already happened, I smiled to myself. I thought, any day now he will call me. He'll ask me to help. He'll want me to be part of this. I imagined myself helping with the suit fittings, maybe picking flowers, maybe even helping her, his bride-to-be, with something small, just to show her that I welcomed her into the family. But the call never came. Days passed, then weeks. I tried to quiet the unease in my chest. I told myself, be patient, he's busy, they're planning. But my patience didn't stop the silence. And the silence felt heavier with each day that passed. Finally, I gathered the courage to ask. It was a small moment, really. Nothing dramatic. We were in the kitchen together, my son and I. I had made his favorite coffee just the way he liked it. A small act of love I thought might open a door to conversation. I waited until he was relaxed. Then I smiled gently and asked, so, when's the big day? I expected a smile back, maybe a blush, maybe even an apology for not telling me sooner, but instead there was this pause. He shifted in his seat, his eyes dropped to the table, and before he could speak, she, the woman he married, leaned in and said it. Her words cut sharper than any knife I've ever known. We got married yesterday, just for special people. Just for special people. I remember that moment so clearly, the way the room seemed to tilt, as if gravity itself betrayed me. My chest tightened, and though I wanted to breathe, I couldn't. I wanted to ask, what do you mean? How could you? But my throat locked. The silence that followed was louder than any scream could have been. My son didn't look at me. He didn't defend me. He didn't reach for my hand. He just sat there, letting her words hang in the air like smoke. Special people. Was I not special? Was the woman who carried him for 9 months, who gave up sleep, comfort, and dreams to make his childhood safe and full, not special enough to stand at his side on his wedding day? I wanted to cry, but the tears wouldn't come. I think in some ways I was too stunned, too broken to even let myself fall apart. My body refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing me weep. So instead I smiled, not out of joy, but because it was the only shield I had left. A thin, fragile smile that hid the earthquake inside of me. I nodded. I whispered, "Oh, I see." And then I excused myself. That night I lay awake in bed replaying everything. Every moment of his childhood spun through my head like a cruel film reel. His first steps, the way he used to run into my arms when he was scared, the nights I stayed up sewing costumes for his school plays, the birthday cakes I made from scratch, even when money was tight. Every memory screamed at me. How could you not be invited? How could you not matter? The truth is, a mother doesn't stop loving, even when she's hurt. I still loved him in that moment, more than words could explain. But I also felt a deep fracture inside me, a wound that words like, "I'm sorry," could never heal. I could have shouted, I could have begged for answers. I could have demanded to know why he allowed it. But I didn't. I stayed silent. Because sometimes silence is the only dignity we have left. As the days passed, I wore that silence like armor. My relatives asked if I'd been to the wedding, and I simply said, "No, I wasn't there." I didn't explain. I didn't expose him. I didn't let them see the betrayal carved into me. Instead, I carried it alone. In private, I would sit with the ache, clutching old photographs, whispering to myself that maybe one day he would understand. Maybe one day he would regret it. Maybe one day, the memory of my absence would haunt him. But until then, I chose quiet. I chose to step back, not because I wasn't worthy, but because I refused to beg for a place I should have been given freely. I didn't know what the future would hold. I didn't know that within a week, life would turn in a way I never expected. All I knew in that moment was this. I was a mother left out of her son's wedding, and I would have to carry that wound in silence. And so I did. The house felt emptier than ever after that day. It wasn't just the absence of footsteps or voices. It was the silence that echoed through the walls. A silence that reminded me with every breath that my son had chosen to leave me behind. When I walked through the rooms, I found myself noticing things I had overlooked before. The picture frames on the mantel seemed heavier, mocking me with frozen smiles from birthdays and holidays gone by. There he was, my boy with frosting on his cheek at his 6th birthday. There he was again, standing in his cap and gown, eyes shining with promise. And there I was, always by his side. Every photo whispered the same cruel question. How could he forget me so easily? The betrayal wasn't just in her words, just for special people. The deeper wound came from his silence. My son, the child I raised, the boy who once clung to me when storms rattled the windows, sat in silence and let her words pierce me. He didn't defend me. He didn't correct her. He didn't even look at me. That silence was louder than the cruelty itself. At night, sleep became a stranger. I would lie awake staring at the ceiling, my heart pounding with unanswered questions. Did he love me at all anymore? Was I such a burden that he felt ashamed of me? Had I failed as a mother, failed so badly that he could cut me out of the biggest day of his life? I replayed every memory, wondering if I had missed something, some moment where he decided I wasn't worthy. I remembered the nights I worked 2 jobs just to keep food on the table, the shoes I went without so he could have new ones, the hours I spent stitching his Halloween costumes by hand because we couldn't afford store-bought. Every sacrifice, every ounce of love, all dismissed with one silent nod at a table where I was told I didn't belong. The loneliness pressed on me like a heavy blanket. During the day, I moved through routines, making coffee, sweeping the kitchen, watering the plants, but each task felt hollow. There was no laughter echoing down the hallway, no voice calling, "Mom." The silence followed me everywhere. Sometimes I cried quietly in the kitchen, pressing a towel against my mouth so no neighbor would hear. Other times I sat in the dark living room with the television on mute, watching the flicker of images without caring what they were. I felt invisible, erased from my own son's story. But in the midst of all that pain, a small voice inside me whispered, "Don't beg. Don't chase. Don't lower yourself to those who cannot see your worth." I held on to that voice. Yes, I was broken. Yes, I was humiliated. But I refused to call him and demand an explanation. I refused to show up at their door with questions that would only earn me more silence. I told myself, if he wants to forget me, let him. But I will not forget who I am. And who I am is a mother, a woman of dignity, a woman who has carried storms before and survived. So I carried my pain quietly. Each morning I forced myself out of bed, even when my body wanted to sink deeper into the mattress. I brewed coffee, even though it tasted bitter on my tongue. I opened the curtains to let the light in, even when my heart longed for darkness. I told myself that surviving, simply standing upright, was its own form of strength. I prayed not for revenge, but for understanding. I prayed for the strength to keep loving without being destroyed by rejection. I prayed for the wisdom to know when silence was not weakness, but power. And slowly, in the quiet hours of the night, I began to see something I hadn't seen before. My son's betrayal cut deep, but it revealed something about me too. I was stronger than I realized. I could be left out, abandoned, humiliated, and still rise the next morning. I could be denied a seat at the table, but still hold my head high. The tears didn't stop overnight. The sleepless nights didn't magically end. There were still hours when the ache felt unbearable. But I learned not to fight for scraps of love from people who withheld it. I learned to protect the little dignity I had left, like a candle in the wind. And in that choice, the choice to remain silent, to not beg, I discovered a quiet kind of power, because dignity cannot be stolen. It can only be surrendered. And I refused to surrender mine. So I sat with my pain. I walked with it. I slept beside it. And in that long, aching silence, I began to understand. Sometimes the cruelest betrayals carry within them the seed of strength. And though I didn't know what would come next, I knew one thing for certain. I would not let this pain destroy me. I would let it shape me. And I would wait. It was exactly 1 week after I had learned about the wedding. The wedding I was never invited to. The wedding that was just for special people. I was standing in my kitchen, washing the same coffee cup I had been using every morning since my son left. The house was quiet, except for the soft trickle of water from the faucet. Then the silence was broken by a sharp, insistent sound. The phone ringing. At first I thought it was nothing unusual. Maybe a telemarketer, maybe a neighbor, maybe even an old friend checking in. I wiped my hands on a towel and picked it up, pressing it to my ear with the smallest flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, it was my son. Maybe he had finally decided to call, to apologize, to explain. But it wasn't his voice. It was hers. The woman who had looked me in the eye and told me I wasn't special enough to be at my own son's wedding. Her voice was different this time. It wasn't smug or sharp. It was rushed, urgent, almost frantic. "Hello? Did you transfer the money? The rent is overdue. We're already late. You were supposed to handle it." I froze. The receiver pressed to my ear. My heart thudded once, twice, like a heavy drum. For a moment, I thought I must have misheard. She couldn't possibly be calling me for help after everything. But she was. Her tone carried none of the disdain she'd shown me before. No mocking edge, no dismissive cruelty. This wasn't the voice of a woman in control. This was the voice of a woman in need. I stood there in the kitchen, clutching the phone, and in that split second, memories crashed over me like a storm. Her words echoed in my mind. We got married yesterday, just for special people. The cold look in her eyes, the silence of my son beside her, the humiliation that burned through me like fire, it all came rushing back. And now, here she was. The same lips that had pushed me out of the most sacred moment of my son's life were now pleading for money to keep a roof over their heads. The irony was almost too heavy to bear. I wanted to laugh, but I didn't. I wanted to cry, but I held it in. Instead, I let the silence stretch between us, savoring it. For a long moment, I didn't say a word. I simply listened to her breathing, fast and shallow, like someone running out of air. She repeated herself, sharper this time. Did you hear me? The rent is overdue. We need you to transfer it now. Please. It's urgent. Please. That word slipped out of her mouth like a stone, heavy and unfamiliar. I thought of all the times I had said please to her. Please be kind to my son. Please treat this family with respect. Please let me be part of his life. None of those pleas had mattered to her. And yet, here she was, uttering that same word as though it might unlock something inside me. My chest rose and fell as I steadied myself. I remembered every tear I had swallowed in silence. Every night I had spent staring at the ceiling, wondering why I wasn't good enough. Every memory of my son choosing silence over loyalty. They hadn't needed me then, but they needed me now. And I had a choice. I could answer quickly, give her the relief she was begging for. I could pretend nothing had happened, slip back into the role of provider, the dependable mother who never let anyone down. Or I could pause, hold the weight of this moment in my hands like something sacred. Remind her, with nothing more than silence, that respect cannot be demanded only when convenient. I let the pause stretch, long enough for her to grow nervous. I could hear it in her voice when she spoke again. Hello? Are you there? We're late. I thought you said you'd cover this month. I closed my eyes. Her words were a tangle of entitlement and desperation. She thought my role in her life was simply to give, to provide, to be useful when she snapped her fingers. But I wasn't her servant. I wasn't her safety net. I was a mother who had been betrayed, and I would not let her forget it. For the first time, I felt a strange calm spread through me. It was as though the universe had given me this moment, not for vengeance, but for clarity. I thought back to that wedding, the empty seat where I should have been, the photographs I would never see, the vows I would never hear, all because I wasn't special enough. And now, as she begged for my help, I whispered in my heart, now you know what it feels like to be left out. I held the phone tighter, my knuckles whitening. I still hadn't spoken. I didn't need to rush. Her panic grew with every second of my silence. Finally, I took a breath, steady and deliberate. When I spoke, my voice was calm, almost gentle, but firm enough to cut through her desperation. Didn't I tell you? That was all. Just 4 words. But those 4 words carried every sleepless night, every hidden tear, every ounce of pain she had thrown at me. On the other end, she fell silent. The urgency drained into confusion. I could almost see her face, tightening with frustration as she realized the ground beneath her wasn't as steady as she thought. For once, I wasn't the powerless one. I wasn't the woman left behind. I was the one holding the line. I didn't shout. I didn't curse. I didn't need to. My silence had spoken for me, and those 4 words were enough to remind her I hadn't forgotten. And I never would. Didn't I tell you? Those 4 words left my lips so softly that even I was surprised by them. They weren't shouted. They weren't drenched in anger or spit through clenched teeth. No. They slipped out like a whisper carried by the wind, calm and steady, but heavier than a scream could ever be. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. I could hear her breathing, quick, uneven, as if she had been running. She was expecting me to rush, to panic, to bend at the first sign of urgency. She thought I would leap to save them, the way I had always leapt to save my son, no matter the cost to myself. But I didn't. I simply let my words hang there. Didn't I tell you? It wasn't just a question. It was a mirror, a reflection of everything she had said to me. Every time she had dismissed me, every time she had decided I wasn't worthy. It was a reminder that I had listened, that I had remembered, and that I hadn't forgotten who she showed herself to be. In that moment, something shifted inside me. For weeks I had been the wounded mother, curled up in the quiet ache of betrayal. For nights I had carried the weight of rejection like a stone strapped to my chest. But standing there with the phone pressed to my ear, I felt something stir. Not anger, not bitterness, but power. The kind of power that comes from restraint. Because anger would have given her exactly what she wanted. Proof that she could control me. Proof that her cruelty still had the ability to rattle my bones. If I shouted, if I cried, if I begged, she would win. But by holding my ground in silence, by keeping my words few and deliberate, I turned the tables. She didn't expect it. She didn't know how to respond. She was the one left scrambling. For the first time, I realized that sometimes strength isn't loud. Sometimes strength is quiet. Sometimes strength is the ability to stand still while others flail in desperation. I thought about all the times in my life when I had mistaken silence for weakness. As a young mother, I believed that unless I was constantly defending myself, constantly proving my worth, I would be overlooked. But now, in this later chapter of my life, I understood. True dignity doesn't demand attention. It doesn't chase validation. True dignity sits steady, unshaken, while the world reveals itself. And that's what I chose in that moment. Her voice cracked on the other end. What? What do you mean? Didn't you tell me what? The rent is due now. We don't have time for this. Her urgency was like static, crackling, frantic. But I didn't rush to soothe it. I didn't let her fear become my responsibility. Instead, I held the silence, letting her wrestle with her own choices. I thought of my son, silent at that kitchen table when she told me I wasn't special. Silent when I deserved his defense. Silent when I needed his loyalty. And now here I was, silent again, but this time not out of weakness, out of choice. There is a difference between silence forced upon you and silence you choose for yourself. The first is suffocating. The second is liberating. And I chose liberation. I spoke again, my voice even, steady, and calm. Didn't I tell you, I said slowly, that words have consequences? Didn't I tell you that you should be careful how you treat people? Didn't I tell you that one day you might need the very person you've pushed away? On the other end, her breath caught. She had no reply. I wasn't cruel, I wasn't mocking. I was simply stating the truth. A truth she couldn't deny. And for the first time since that wedding, since that awful moment when I was told I wasn't special, I felt the ground beneath my feet again. I felt steady. I felt in control, because control doesn't come from shouting someone down. It comes from knowing you don't need to. I realized, standing there in my quiet kitchen, that I had been living under the illusion that I was powerless. That being left out meant I had no value. That being excluded meant I was forgotten. But the truth was different. My value didn't vanish because they failed to see it. My worth wasn't erased because they refused to honor it. I was still me, still the woman who had sacrificed, loved, and endured. Still the mother who had built a life out of scraps and given her son every chance to succeed. Still the woman who had dignity enough to stand on her own. And in that realization, the hurt began to loosen its grip. It didn't disappear. Betrayal doesn't vanish overnight. But it shifted. It transformed from a raw wound into a scar, something that hurt less with every passing moment. I could almost feel her frustration through the phone. She wanted me to cave. She wanted me to rush in, wallet open, heart bleeding, ready to save them yet again. But instead, she was met with calm. She was met with the very thing she had never shown me: control, grace, and restraint. I said no more. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I didn't explain myself further. I let the silence return, filling the space between us until she had no choice but to hear it. Because silence, in that moment, was louder than any lecture. It said, "I remember what you did." It said, "I will not be used." It said, "I know my worth, and I will not lower it for you." When I finally ended the call, my hands were steady. My breathing was calm. My heart, though still bruised, felt stronger than it had in weeks. I walked back to the sink, placed the phone on the counter, and let the quiet of the house wrap around me again. But this time, the silence wasn't suffocating. It was empowering. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't the broken mother sitting in the shadows of betrayal. I was a woman standing tall in the truth of who she was. And that truth didn't need to shout. It didn't need to prove itself. It simply was. It didn't happen overnight. Consequences never arrive when people expect them. They creep in slowly, like shadows stretching across the floor as the sun sets, until finally you realize the whole room has gone dark. That's how it was for them. My son and his wife. After that first call, there was silence. Not the silence of dignity, like the one I had chosen for myself, but the silence of desperation. The kind that makes you wonder if help is ever going to come, if relief is ever going to arrive. For days, I heard nothing. I went about my life in the quiet rhythm I had built. Morning coffee by the window, evenings with my book, nights lying awake but no longer crying. I was learning to live again without constantly reaching for a phone that never rang with love. But then it did ring again. The second call came late in the evening, when the world outside was hushed and still. My son's voice this time, not hers. Trembling, low, almost ashamed. "Mom," he said, We're really in trouble. The landlord, the late fees. I don't know what to do." For a moment, I closed my eyes. That voice, my son's voice, carried me back through years of memories. The little boy who used to run through the house with scraped knees, calling, "Mom," when he needed a bandage. The teenager who once whispered, "Mom," when heartbreak first struck him. And now here he was again, calling, "Mom," but not out of love, out of need. It cut me, but not in the way it once would have. This time I didn't leap. I didn't abandon myself to rescue him from the mess his choices had created. I listened. I let him speak. I heard the cracks in his voice, the unspoken truth that he was starting to realize, that the woman he married, the one who told me I wasn't special, had led him down a path of arrogance and cruelty, and now that path was crumbling beneath their feet. I let him finish, and then I answered with steady calm. "I'm sorry you're struggling," I said. "But didn't I tell you? The way you treat people will always come back to you." There was silence, a deep, aching silence. I could hear his breathing, heavy, uneven. He wanted me to rescue him. He wanted me to pretend nothing had happened, to brush aside the way I had been discarded. But I couldn't. Not this time. Because dignity had taught me something anger never could. That sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is nothing. Not rushing, not rescuing, not erasing the lesson. It was hard. Harder than I can describe. Every bone in my body, every instinct as a mother, screamed at me to reach out. To save him. To remind him that no matter what, I was still his mother. but I held myself still. And in that stillness, I found strength. The days went on. The calls became more frequent. Sometimes it was her, voice sharp with frustration, trying to cover her desperation with arrogance. Sometimes it was him, softer, more broken, inching closer to understanding. I never yelled. I never scolded. I never threw their cruelty back in their faces, though I remembered every word. Instead, I stood in my truth. Calm, steady, dignified. And slowly I began to notice something. The tone of their voices changed. Her sharpness dulled. His silence grew longer, heavier, like he was reflecting instead of just reacting. And in those changes, I realized something even more powerful. They were starting to understand. Understand that I had never been powerless. Understand that I had never been less special. Understand that the very person they had dismissed was the one they needed most. It wasn't about money. It wasn't about rent. It was about respect. It was about worth. It was about realizing that the ties of family aren't meant to be exploited, they're meant to be honored. And now, standing at the edge of their unraveling, I knew they were finally learning the lesson I had once begged for silently in my heart. There was one call I'll never forget. My daughter-in-law's voice, unsteady, stripped of arrogance. I shouldn't have said those things to you, she whispered. I know I was wrong. Those words, small as they were, felt heavier than anything she had ever thrown at me. Not because they erased the hurt. They didn't. Not because they healed the wound. That would take longer. But because for the first time she understood. And that understanding was my greatest revenge. Not the kind of revenge that screams or destroys. Not the kind that seeks to hurt in return. But the quiet revenge of dignity. The kind that lets time and patience do the work, that allows the truth to rise up on its own. Because patience, I discovered, can cut deeper than anger ever could. Anger flares and fades, but patience lingers. Anger burns hot and fast, but patience burns slow, steady, and unrelenting. And in that slow burn, the lesson is seared deeper than any words could carve. I didn't need to raise my voice. I didn't need to slam doors or curse their names. All I needed was to hold my ground, to stand in the quiet certainty of my worth. And in time, they saw it. They felt it. They realized it. There was no celebration in their downfall for me, no joy in their struggle. Because as much as they had hurt me, I was still a mother. And a mother's heart never stops caring, even when it's bruised. But I also knew that rushing to save them would erase the lesson. And so I didn't. I let them sit in the consequences of their choices. I let them taste the silence they had once forced upon me. And in doing so, I found peace. For years I thought revenge meant shouting back, proving myself, demanding apologies. But now I knew better. Revenge wasn't about rage. It was about respect. Self-respect. And when they finally realized the truth, when they finally saw that the woman they had dismissed as not special was the very anchor they needed, I didn't have to lift a finger. My dignity had already spoken for me. When I look back now, I see the story differently than I once did. For a long time, I thought betrayal had broken me. I thought silence meant defeat. I thought being excluded from my son's wedding was the end of my worth as a mother. But I was wrong. Betrayal didn't destroy me. It revealed the truth. Silence didn't weaken me. It became my greatest weapon. And the pain of being cast aside became the soil where I planted something stronger. Dignity. I learned that revenge doesn't always roar. It doesn't always tear things down or lash out in fury. Sometimes revenge is as simple as standing still, refusing to be used, refusing to let yourself be reduced to a doormat. Sometimes the sweetest revenge is patience, letting time do what anger never could. I didn't slam doors, I didn't shout, I didn't beg. I simply let them feel the weight of their choices. And in the end, they learned. So I stand here now, not bitter, not broken, but free, at peace, stronger than I ever thought I could be, Because sometimes silence is the loudest answer.